All right, fellow adventurers, so let's talk D&D magic. Ever notice how it, hits differently than other fantasy worlds?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's not just about, lobbing fireballs. There's a certain spice to it.
Yeah.
Today, we're tracing that unique flavor back to its source, and trust me, it's a name you might not expect, Jack Vance.
It's fascinating how deeply woven Jack Vance's work is into the DNA of D&D, even if his name isn't as widely recognized as, say, Tolkien.
Right. Tolkien's got the epic scope, but Vance, he's like the secret ingredient that makes D&D magic sing.
Exactly. Think about those early D&D games, those classic dungeon crawls. They weren't always about saving the world, were they?
More like grabbing loot and hoping not to get turned into a toad by a trap.
Precisely. And that's where Vance's influence shines. His Dying Earth series, especially the four main books like the Dying Earth itself or Kugel's saga, they paint a picture of a world where magic is less about grand heroism and more about, well, let's just say his wizards are a pragmatic bunch.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But whose mark on the game is undeniable. Jack Vance.
You've probably heard the term Vancian spellcasting tossed around.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Who was Vance and what makes his work so essential to D&D? That's what we're going to unpack today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for those new to the table, let's quickly set the scene.
Okay.
Imagine classic D&D. You've got your group your dice and that feeling of boundless possibility as you create a story together.
It's the best.
Oh, the best. And you got your fighters, your clerics, your magic users. Even rogues eventually found their way into the mix.
Yeah, we're talking those early editions, 1974 onwards, where D&D was still kind of finding its identity. This was even before the split into D&D and AD&D.
Right.
And what's interesting is that early D&D wasn't always about heroic quests and saving the world.
Yep.
It was a bit rougher around the edges, a bit more about personal gain, even a touch on the darker side.
So less about slaying dragons for glory, more like slaying dragons to melt down their horde and retire early.
You got it. And that's where Jack Vance's Dying Earth series comes in.
Okay.
It's a world on the brink where magic is this raw, dangerous force. And the people who wield it aren't necessarily shining knights.
Right.
It's a setting that perfectly captures that early D&D spirit.
Okay.
And it had a huge influence on the game's mechanics tone, even specific spells. We're talking direct inspiration here.
Wow.
In fact, Appendix N, basically a list of inspirational reading for Dungeon Masters in the AD&D and Dungeon Master's Guide, specifically mentions Vance.
So we're talking more than just a passing influence.
Oh, yeah.
This is core D&D DNA we're talking about.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest ways you see this is in D&D's magic system itself, Vancian spellcasting.
Ah, yes. The source of every wizard's woes, those limited spell slots.
Oh, yeah.
You prepare your spells, you cast them, and then poof, you're relying on your dagger and hoping your companions can handle things.
Exactly. And that prepare and forget system, that comes directly from Vance.
Really?
He understood that magic, to be truly impactful, had to have limits. It couldn't just be an endless stream of fireballs.
Yeah.
It had to be wielded with strategy and care.
It's kind of brilliant when you think about it. It makes magic feel more precious, more powerful.
Exactly. And you see this influence not just in the broader system, but in specific spells, too. Think prismatic spray, that dazzling, chaotic blast of energy. Well, Vance envisioned it first in the excellent prismatic spray.
That's amazing. I had no idea there was a direct connection. What other spells have their roots in Vance's work?
Well, there are quite a few. Clone, simulacrum, even spells like hypnotic pattern and resilient sphere. They all have echoes of Vance's magic system in them.
Wow, yeah.
And it goes beyond just the names, the way these spells function, their limitations, their very feel. It all harkens back to the unique magic system Vance created.
Imagine this. You're a wizard, but you don't have unlimited magical ammo. You've got a limited number of spells prepared, and once you cast them, poof, they're gone until you rest and memorize them again.
So it's like choosing your spells strategically each a day, knowing you've got limited shots.
That's a far cry from just spamming fireballs until everything's a crispy critter.
Exactly. It's about resource management planning, making each spell count. And it completely changes how you approach a dungeon, how you think about magic, even how you build your character. Think about how different that is from other fantasy systems where magic is more readily available.
Yeah, it's a completely different kind of tension and strategy knowing every spell cast has weight to it. So we've got spells ripped straight from the pages of the Dying Earth. But what about all the magical goodies D&D is known for?
Yeah.
Did Vance have a hand in crafting those enchanted trinkets too?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
There's Ioun Stones you see floating around in D&D, granting powers to those who possess them.
Yeah.
Straight from Vance's Rialto the Marvelous. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
They're not just cool trinkets with a familiar name. They actually function quite similarly to how Vance envisioned them.
Oh, wow.
These stones, each with its own unique property, really highlight his creativity in crafting magical items that went beyond the typical swords and shields.
That's wild. I always thought they were a cool D&D invention.
Yeah.
It's amazing how deeply Vance's work permeates the game.
Yeah.
Speaking of you mentioned that the D&D artifact creator, Vecna,
Yes.
might actually be a nod to Vance.
Yes. Vecna is an anagram of Vance, a subtle tribute hidden in plain sight. Clearly, the creators of D&D had immense respect for him. But beyond the mechanics of spells and items, Vance's influence really shines in how he shaped the very spirit of those early D&D adventures.
Okay, so we've established that Vance's fingerprints are all over D&D's magic system, and even its magical loot. But you're right, D&D is more than just rolling dice and slinging spells.
Right.
It's about the stories we weave and the characters who inhabit those worlds. So
Yeah.
how did Vance's work influence that more nuanced aspect of the game?
Well, you remember how we talked about early D&D having that morally ambiguous flavor, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't always clear-cut good versus evil. Vance's Dying Earth embodies this perfectly.
Yeah.
In fact, there's one character who really exemplifies that early D&D spirit, Kugel the Clever.
Kugel the Clever. That name just screams cunning rogue. Tell me more.
He's the epitome of a charming rogue, skilled with both word and blade, and always ready to use those skills for his own benefit, even if it means bending the rules a bit. Or a lot.
Oh.
Cougal is all about self-preservation and outsmarting his adversaries. He's not out to save the world. He's out to survive it, preferably with his pockets full of treasure.
That's such a departure from the more heroic archetypes we often associate with D&D today.
Exactly. And that's what makes Cougal such a perfect example of Vance's influence on D&D's DNA. Okay, I'm getting some serious, chaotic, neutral vibes here. Not exactly the shining knight in armor.
Exactly. Kugel is driven by self-preservation, a healthy dose of greed, and an uncanny knack for escaping trouble he often creates himself. And it's in his escapades that we see the echoes of those early D&D modules, the ones notorious for their lethality and emphasis on treasure, not necessarily heroism.
You mean classics like Tomb of Horrors, where the dungeon itself feels designed to kill you in increasingly creative ways?
Precisely. These modules weren't about saving princesses or defeating the ultimate evil. They were puzzles to solve, often with a healthy dose of risk-reward calculation. Does the potential loot outweigh the very real possibility of becoming a permanent part of the dungeon decor? That's a very Vancian dilemma.
His motives weren't purely heroic. He was driven by cunning ambition and a good dose of self-preservation. And you know what? Early D&D embraced that modules like Tomb of Horrors, notoriously difficult dungeons designed to test players' skills and cunning.
Oh, yeah.
Weren't about saving the world. They were about survival outsmarting traps and walking away with as much loot as you could carry.
Which, now that you mention it, makes perfect sense when you think about how experience points worked in those early editions.
Yeah.
You weren't rewarded for acts of heroism. You were rewarded for amassing gold.
Precisely. That's the Vancian influence at its core. It was a reflection of that dying Earth mentality, a world where survival often hinged on being resourceful, cunning, and maybe a little bit ruthless.
It's almost like they were playing a different game back then.
In a way, they were. It's fascinating.
Yeah. It really is thinking about how this whole concept of gold being the main motivator, which seems so core to D&D, can be traced back to, this one author's vision.
It's true. And it's a fascinating example of how, creative works can influence each other even across different mediums.
Yeah.
Vance's vision of a dying world full of cunning rogues and perilous dungeons clearly resonated with the creators of D&D.
Right.
And it's woven into the fabric of the game even today.
It makes you appreciate those early editions of D&D in a whole new light.
Yeah.
They weren't just about being the hero. They were about navigating a world where survival often meant being as cunning as Kugel the Clever, always ready to outwit your opponent and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat.
Absolutely. And while modern D&D has certainly embraced more heroic narratives, that Vancian influence is still there, bubbling beneath the surface.
Right.
It's in the mechanics of spellcasting, in the allure of those magical items, and even in the darker corners of the game's lore.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how many players today realize they're tapping into this legacy every time they cast a spell or, navigate a dungeon full of traps.
Speaking of foundations, didn't the creators of D&D actually acknowledge Vance's influence directly? I vaguely remember something about an appendix.
You're thinking of Appendix N from the original Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. Think of it as a literary treasure map, a list of authors that directly inspired the creation of D&D. And right there, amidst titans like Tolkien and Fritz Leiber, you'll find Jack Vance's name practically glowing with arcane significance.
It's like they're saying, hey, if you want to understand the heart of this game, the choices we made, go read these authors. And Vance is right there at the top of the list. But even beyond Appendix N, there's something about his work about those morally ambiguous characters like Kugel that just feels like classic D&D, you know?
Absolutely. That sense of wonder mixed with a healthy dose of don't trust anyone, especially the guy with the 20-sided die. It's a potent combination that continues to draw people to both Vance's writing and the world of D&D.
It's a testament to the enduring power of Vance's imagination. He created a world so rich, so detailed, and so unlike anything that had come before that it continues to resonate with generations of readers and gamers alike.
Absolutely. So for any of our listeners out there who are itching for a taste of that classic Vance-inspired D&D, maybe it's time to dust off those old modules. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the enduring legacy of Jack Vance and his indelible mark on the world of D&D. Until next time, may your dice rolls be ever in your favor, and may your adventures be filled with a touch of Vancian wonder.